Hello, everybody. Welcome. Great to see you here at ClarinetFest 2021. I'm Michelle Anderson, founder of Clarinet Mastery, and today we're going to be talking about Clarinet High Notes, what makes them easier to play. This is part of the whole clarinet learning community at ClarinetFest. I'm here to help people who are relatively new to the clarinet. I encourage you to sign in on the chat. Let me know where you're watching from, and I'll be definitely taking questions from you. So use the Q&A section, or if you write it in the chat, put a couple question marks at the beginning of it, and I'll try and get to your questions as we go. So I'm going to start with some of the things that are the first challenges we have with high notes, but I know we have people who are watching from various levels, so I'll throw in some more advanced things as we get to the end of our session. One of the things about high notes, I think they're one of the most frustrating parts of playing clarinet, and it's certainly where we first encounter this real squeaky, squawky, it's not working frustration. And here's what I think about high notes. They're just like a barometer. They're indicators of what's going well in our playing and what's not. So if there's something that's not quite right, we're way more likely to notice it in the high register than we are in the low register. In a way, it's a gift to us, because if we get some of those basics working so the high notes are easy, then the low notes are going to be super easy. So I'm going to go through as much as I can in 25 minutes for you. This will be recorded. If you have your clarinets out, try it. Otherwise, look for this on the the International Clarinet Association YouTube channel later, and you can go back and review some of these exercises. All right. So for most of us, our first introduction to clarinet high notes happens in our first year of playing. And if we were at ClarinetFest in person, I'd have a group of you in front of me. I want to talk about one of the ways that I think is easiest to get started on high notes, and that's to take a low note that's relatively comfortable. So I'm going to take our low A, where I have my whole left hand down, two fingers on the right hand. One of the most important things is that we're always using very fast and focused air when we're playing. And a lot of times when we encounter something challenging, it's our body's instinct to kind of back off on the air. And that in fact makes the high notes harder. So one of my favorite exercises is just to play that low A. And if I were doing this with you in person, what's fun is to have somebody else come over and push the register key when you least expect it. And that note will often just pop out. So I want to just bring some attention to our left thumb, because this is kind of important too. Normally our left thumb is covering the hole on the back of the clarinet, and when we go into the high note, it has to also push the register key open. When a lot of people are new to this, they move their thumb so much it ends up coming off the hole a little bit. So I like to just hold my clarinet out where I can see my thumb, as I'm doing right now, and just kind of practice rolling up to it with just the edge of my thumb hitting it. Beyond that, I try and have my thumb always, even when I'm playing the low register, pointing up just a little bit. You have to see how your hand fits on the clarinet. But that way, for me, low to high is that much movement. I'm barely moving at all, if you can see that. And that's something that's going to help. So first, kind of get your thumb set. Then when I'm going to play that low A, I'm going to think really fast, steady air. If I'm blowing fast, steady air, usually that high E will just pop out. And if it does, I want you to notice how easy that can feel. If my thumb moves too far, so I open the register key and it keeps rocking up, so there's a hole, I'll experience something like this. It'll squeak, or it'll suddenly feel really resistant. That's super common. So that gives you a hint to one of the things that commonly goes wrong. So I recommend when you're first new to high notes, you just try that. Once you're in the high register, then maybe move your right hand around a little bit, because my left thumb is now in a good position and I'm blowing with fast air. And while you're doing it, this might sound silly, but I think there's so many parts of our brain at work when we play clarinet. I want you to, with your logical part of the brain, just say to yourself, oh, it's actually easy. We want to start calming down the parts of our brain that panic because we know high notes are so hard. When we're in panic mode, we tend to tense up, and that tension causes problems with high notes, and we tend to back off with our air, which causes problems with high notes. So our goal when we're working on high notes is to be very relaxed in our shoulders, our jaw. Of course, we have some embouchure support, we have air support, but to be relaxed with super fast air. And if those two things are there, the rest of it becomes much easier. Now, if you didn't see last week's session where we were talking about fingers, I did quite a bit of work on left hand position. I'm going to briefly review it, but I'll recommend you watch that because when people are first doing what we call crossing the break, moving from low register into high, they're often not aware that maybe 80% of their problems are caused by their left hand having trouble navigating through the keys. And there's a few habits that we can train our fingers to do that make it a whole lot easier. And it takes some training, it doesn't feel natural right away. So I'll do a quick review here. A lot of times when we work our way up a scale, and a lot of times your band method will have you play concert B flat scale. So we're going C, D, E, F, G, A. I want to show you this A key. Our instinct is to lift our finger off the hole and hit the A key with the same part of our finger that we use to cover the holes. That kind of intuitively makes sense, but it's not the best position on clarinet. We always want our fingers, when they come off of their holes, to hover. I call this like home position. All my fingers are on the holes. When I lift them off, they shouldn't go very far. So this top finger needs to be able to get back to its hole really easily. And when I'm doing that scale, A up to high B, one of the hardest finger jumps in clarinet that we often encounter super early in our clarinet learning, we want the finger to be able to come back to it more easily. So here's an exercise I have. We play a low C, just thumb, our three fingers on top. And I want you to take your index finger and roll up and open that A key. Now, if we're actually playing clarinet, this won't really sound like a note at all, but it's good practice to do. What we're doing is training our finger to move as little as possible. So even though this is a nonsense note, I often have my students try this. Doesn't matter if it squeaks. What we're paying attention to is what part of my finger is hitting that key. From there, if I did lift my fingers just a bit, then I can actually play C to A. But what I'm training is noticing that for me, it's kind of like the side of my knuckle. Doing this in front of a mirror is great practice. The other thing you want to try when we're keeping our fingers close is watch your left wrist. Our left wrist likes to fly. And if my left wrist flies up, it's really hard to get these fingers back onto their holes. So if I keep my wrist still and just move my fingers, that interval becomes a lot easier. So I'm preparing my fingers to go from A up to high B. And that's an interval that throws a lot of people off. So starting with that, and we already talked about our left thumb. So at the same time, when my left thumb is not on the hole, I want it to just hover above that thumb hole. And when it comes back, it's touching the register key. So that takes training. And once we do train it, then that A to B only has to involve this much finger movement, A, B, A, B. So you can see my thumb is staying really close, my index finger is rolling down, and I really encourage you to train your fingers to do that. It makes life a lot easier. On top of that, and I believe we can only kind of focus on one thing at a time, really, in our brain. So you can do what I'm doing. I'm not even playing clarinet. I'm looking at my fingers in my screen. You can look in the mirror or just look at your fingers, train them to do that. Then I want to add that fast air. That interval becomes so much easier. So when when we're jumping up to the high notes and it suddenly stops playing altogether, and it feels like you're blowing really hard, that's usually a sign that one of your fingers is just not covering the hole all the way. That's why I love doing this exercise in front of a mirror. You can often see which finger's off and just adjust it a bit. If everything from the front looks good, prime suspect is left thumb, which is a little harder to see in the mirror. Whatever device you're watching me on, you could record yourself and just do it in profile. Then you can kind of see what your left thumb is up to and do some correction there. So that's going to be helpful as you're training your fingers. So kind of the whole first thing to be aware of when we're tackling the high register has a lot to do with our left hand position. And it makes life so much easier when that starts to get into shape. So just that little exercise we were just doing, if you did it like 2 minutes a day for the next 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to find your left hand starts to feel natural in that position, and it makes life a whole lot easier. On our right hand, we also want to keep our fingers close to the holes. And I mentioned last time our natural hand position is like a little finger puppet, round, relaxed. So we're keeping them close to home position, relaxed. Another thing that throws, especially if you have small hands, can throw us off, is the holes are so much bigger on the right hand, especially this bottom one. So sometimes when we're going up to high notes, it's our bottom finger that's leaking, especially if our right pinky is involved. These two fingers like to move together, our littlest fingers. And sometimes when we reach for a pinky key, it pulls what I call the ring finger off. Same thing on our left hand. If I'm reaching for a pinky key, it might be pulling that finger off. So the clues again that we might be not covering the holes is when it suddenly feels really hard to play and the sound kind of blanks out. That's an indication that you might go, oh yeah, maybe my fingers aren't there. Now, the other really common thing that makes the notes not come out is we're trying hard, we're concentrating, and while we're concentrating, our jaw is munching down on the reed. And the reed it actually in natural time will close and open many times quickly. That's how it vibrates. We want it to do that. We want fast air to have it vibrating quickly, but it's easy to pinch it shut. If I pinch it all the way shut, no sound's going to come out of the clarinet because no air can go through. I'm blowing really hard, nothing's happening, my head's going to explode, right? So usually we don't tighten that much because it would be obvious, but if we tighten down a bit, it will cause a squeak. And there are other causes of squeaks. Sometimes leaky fingers can squeak, but that's one of the most common ones. So if you're getting a squeak and you're not quite sure why, it may have to do with your jaw. So I want to show you a fingering that helps test whether or not we're biting. And if you're already playing some high register notes, this will be relatively easy for you to try out. It's a really unstable fingering, but it helps us figure out what we might be doing properly or improperly with our air and embouchure. So here's the fingering: thumb and register key. First two fingers on our left hand. We're going to leave our third finger off and the first two fingers of our right hand. So this fingering feels very strange. When we try and blow it, it doesn't work very well. But what it should be is the same as a high G sharp on the top of the staff. It doesn't like to do that, and I love having people try this because here's the two things that commonly go wrong. This will squeak really easily. And if it squeaks, that's useful information for you. It tells you your jaw might be just pinching a little more than you want to. The way we counter it, we can think of opening our jaw, but I almost like to think more about bringing the corners of my mouth in. And that helps to counteract it. The other thing that happens really commonly is instead of getting a high note, we get this low, buzzy undertone. And you've probably experienced that undertone before. That's a sign that our air is not moving fast enough. And sometimes we get both. We hear the undertone and we think, oh, my air is not moving faster, I better blow harder. And then when we blow harder, we munch our jaw down and it squeaks. So when you can find that balance of round corners, so your jaw is open, your air is really fast, when that note comes out well, that's the feeling you want for your high register. And it shows you have good air support, your embouchure is in the right shape. So it's a really handy tool to use. It can take a little while to get it working properly, but now you know what it is. And I'll quickly mention the role of reeds in high notes. Generally speaking, when we first pick up the clarinet, we play on a reed that's fairly easy to vibrate. And so it's what we call a softer reed. For a lot of people, that's a 2, maybe a 2.5, depending on what your teacher starts you on. And as we get better at blowing faster air and adding some embouchure support, then we need a reed that's a little bit more resistant. So over time, we go up half a strength at a time until we level off somewhere at a higher strength. And generally speaking, every mouthpiece is different. So I'm just giving you generalizations. When we start playing in the high register, usually you want at least a 2.5 to give you the strength to help those notes come out more easily. And if you're playing more in a classical style, when we start going above high G up to kind of our high C, it's usually easier with about a 3. And I'm just generalizing, but I'll throw that out there that maybe you started clarinet and you've been playing a year or two. If you're still on a 2, you might have a reed that's too soft for you. And one of the obvious signs of that, if you're trying to play in the high register and the top notes on your left hand kind of wimp out, this is what a reed that's too soft can sound like. Right, that sound. Now, I'm creating that by using wimpy air. So that low sound means the high note doesn't have enough support. Support definitely comes from embouchure and air, but it also comes from the reed. So if you're experiencing that kind of sound a lot and you're on a low number, it just could be a sign that you might want to try the next reed strength up, and that can make high notes a lot easier too. If you have a teacher, they'll help guide you through it. But a lot of people are just kind of working on their own, and I would encourage you to be curious about maybe trying the next strength if you're finding that's happening. What I was just showing you, how we go up to those high notes and they wimp out, especially our high C, thumb and register key likes to wimp out. The other thing we want to think about there is it all comes back to air. A lot of people say, I can kind of slur my high notes, but when I'm tonguing, it doesn't work. And there's probably 2 reasons why tonguing in the high register doesn't work so well. One of them is our natural instinct. Everybody does it. When we tongue, our air likes to fluctuate with the movement of our tongue. It usually likes to accent the air when our tongue hits the reed, and then it kind of fades. So if this is my tongue hitting the reed, it's like I'm going, and when my air stops after every note, I don't have enough airspeed to start the next note. Whereas when I'm slurring, my air is nonstop. So it's extra important in the high register, just because it's more reactable, that we always train ourselves to keep our air steady, right? Steady with lots of air support behind it. So that's something we can just whisper and then try working our way up high notes. If I start huffing, it's much harder to get that note out. So just illustrating, trying to give you information so you kind of diagnose for yourself what might be causing my high notes to have trouble. So when we're new to it, hand position is really important. Fast air is super important. Having a reed that's strong enough without being really hard to blow for you is important too. If I just should qualify, you don't want to just say, oh, I want to be an advanced player, I'm going to put a 5 on, because then it's going to be so hard to blow, it's going to be ineffective. So we usually just go up half a strength at a time, or some reeds have quarter strengths. You just kind of ease your way up and get used to it. But it is possible to outgrow a reed and not be aware of it. All right, so I know some of you have been playing a little bit longer, so I want to show you something else that is important to know, even when you're a new player, that can really affect how our high notes work. And I'm going to bring a tuner into play. I'm in a cold room, so I might be a little on the low side, but that doesn't really matter for this exercise. So what I'm going to do is change my camera view so that you get a chance to see my tuner, and I'll show you the exercise. Actually, before I do that, I'll tell you what we're going to do. So there's a term we use for clarinet playing that's called voicing. Voicing describes the shape of the inside of our mouth. So when we're first learning, a lot of people talk about our embouchure, the shape of our lips and everything here, which is all really important, pulling our chin down, corners in. But the position of our tongue has a huge impact on our tone, and also then the response of our high notes. So when we're playing, say, classical music, and often the tone we would use in our concert bands and our orchestras, we're going to get better sound if our tongue inside of our mouth, in the back of our mouth, is really high, like a bridge. So if this is my mouth, normally my tongue likes to hang out in the bottom of my mouth. So as the air comes up my windpipe, goes in there, there's kind of a big space there. And when fast air hits a big space, it's kind of like a river hitting the ocean. The current will spread out and slow down. It makes our air wimpier. We want fast air. So if our tongue can sit high up in our mouth, our air will whoosh through there. It's a little hard to figure out what that feels like because we can't see what our tongue is doing inside our mouth unless we have some built-in x-ray machine, which I know I don't. So there are some vowel sounds that help get us there. And different people have different approaches. The one I find useful is to think of a he sound. And I like the H at the beginning of it because that spreads out the sides of our tongue in back. So if you were to say he, you might even feel the edges of your tongue hitting the inside of your top molars. And if they do, that can kind of be an anchor point. Some people use more of a hue. It's whatever works for you, but we want the back of our tongue high. And that can drastically affect sound. There's a tool you can use to help you with this, to help you figure out if your tongue's in the right place. And that tool is a tuner. So I just want to illustrate for you how that works. So let me get my tuner on screen here. Okay, so you can see my tuner in the middle of the screen. And what we're going to do is play the high G, our thumb, first three fingers on the left hand. And I'll see if I'm in tune. I'm in a cold room, so I might be flat. Let's see what happens here. So I'm around 8 or 9 cents flat. That's okay for this exercise. If you're in a hot room, you might be sharp. For this exercise, I'm going to be putting my clarinet in my mouth and speaking he while my lips are sealed. He, and try and freeze my tongue in that position. Then I'm going to play the G, and I'm slowly going to go up, lifting one finger at a time. And I want to watch what my pitch does. If our tongue is too low, the pitch will get lower and lower on each note. So if I'm starting at -8, I want to stay at -8 all the way up. If it starts going lower and lower, that might be a sign that my tongue is low. Let me see if I can warm up my clarinet just a bit so I'm more in tune. You might know that as our clarinet gets hotter, the pitch goes higher. Okay, I'm much closer in tune by blowing some more air in. I'm going to show you what happens when my tongue is a little bit low. Maybe I'm more in an A position instead of a he. Watch how as I go up, you can see the little number under the face tells you how flat I am. You might see it get flatter and flatter. So I ended up being 50 cents flat. It wasn't awful tongue position. It was just a little bit out. If I go up more into that he position, hopefully we'll see it be more steady as I go. So again, I'm a little bit flat in this room, but I got the smile face and it stayed smiling most of the way through. I love doing this exercise in front of a tuner. I'll go back to just having you see me without my tuner there. I love doing this exercise because you have something to look at. And if you can bring that tuner in tune, usually what you're doing is lifting your tongue and training yourself to have the right position. If you're ever playing your high notes and you find you get that not only flat in pitch, but kind of a squawky sound, that could be your tongue being too low. Like this. Here's my tongue being not great. It's kind of an obnoxious sound. I have lots of air, so I'm getting a loud sound, but it's not very focused. And just lifting my tongue makes a big difference to the tone that comes out. So I love working on voicing, which is shape of the tongue inside our mouth with a tuner, because when you get that in tune, you're teaching your body what it feels like. And if you recorded yourself the way I just did, you would hear the difference in your sound. So it's a really helpful tool to help us as we're trying to make the high notes speak and to be in tune. All right, I have one more advanced thing I was going to throw in, but I'm just going to pause to see if there's any questions here from any of you. Oh, Tim's asking, how am I projecting the tuner? I have a Mac computer and I'm using a tool called eCam, which lets me put on different cameras and stuff, different camera angles. So it allows me to share my iPhone. It's handy when I'm doing these broadcasts. Okay, let me open the Q&A box. Gary's saying, if I hit the roof of my mouth with my tongue while playing, am I keeping my tongue in the correct high position, or is that too high? Well, that's a great question, Gary. You know what people have found who really study these things is every person has a different shaped oral cavity, uh, different ways of doing it. You kind of have to see what works for you, but usually we're not actually touching the top of our mouth for most people. I mean, you have to experiment and see what works for you, but some people, as I said, do touch the sides of their mouth kind of above their top molars so that there's still a little bridge on top of it. I don't think there's a perfect position for universally for us. We all have different mouths. We need to figure out what works. But in my experience, if you think he or Hugh, you're going to find something that, when you turn that tuner on and do the exercise I just showed you, will give you good pitch and good tone at the same time. All right. And Lucy's saying, when I go down, up and down the scale, the sound gets low toward the end. Does that mean I need more air? So Lucy, I'm not sure if you mean low on the high notes or low at the bottom notes, but a tuner can help us. Often if we're going flat, it's our air being a little too wimpy. So I can go flat when my tongue is too low on a high note, but also if I let my air go really slowly. Oh, Lucy, you've added a note. Okay, on the highest note. Yeah, so in the illustration I was just showing you where I was going higher and my pitch got more flat as I went up. Although that can be related to air, it's often what I was saying with the tongue inside your mouth. So Lucy, if you try the exercise I just did, and remember that was high G to A to B to C, just those 4 notes, and you can get your tuner to stay in the same position, that really helps. If they're all a little bit flat, could just be you're in a cold room, or if they're all sharp, it could be you're in a hot room, but you want it to be consistent. That's what we're looking for, is that it stays the same. And that's usually voicing. And I find voicing, I sure didn't learn it instantly. I kind of understood the concept, and I would walk around going, my teacher said, "Hugh," and I'd go, "Hugh, Hugh." And I'd play, and my tongue would be way out of position. So it helped when I spoke it with my lips sealed on the clarinet, to help train my body to do that. And it really helped when I had that tuner there, just to make it a little bit easier. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Lucy. I think I've answered your question. Gosh, we have about 2 minutes left, and then there's a wonderful concert being broadcast that I want to make sure you can all see. So I'm going to quickly show you one last thing. This is more advanced, just for those of you who might be working on the 3rd register of high notes we call the altissimo, which is high notes above high C. One of my favorite exercises to help get our mouth used to it is to finger a low C. And when we get into the really high notes, it actually helps if our jaw points down into the heart of the reed. Now, this is not biting. We already talked about how biting the tip of the reed's a bad habit. We're just pushing down a little bit. A preparatory exercise for that, and you can do this on any note, I like to do it on a low C though, is we finger a low C, and by pushing our jaw down into the heart of the reed, we try and play some overtones, some higher notes. If you've never done it, it feels kind of weird. I'm actually trying to squeak. So I'm just working my way through different notes just with my jaw. And if I do that and then go back to once I get those unstable notes working well, and then I go to the regular fingerings, it just pops out effortlessly. So it's another one of those training exercises that helps us get there. Okay, fabulous. So everybody, I want to thank you so much for coming today. Thank you for your questions. As I said, this will go up on the ICA YouTube channel, so you can watch it later, and I hope you get a chance to enjoy as many events here as you can.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Be sure to check the session out online, as well as the other sessions that Michelle has done throughout Clarinet Fest. I believe there was one each weekend. We had her working very, very hard. So thank you, Michelle, for all of your time and effort. And please, please check out Michelle, Clarinet Mentor. She's amazing. She does great work, and she can help you get the next level in your playing, for sure. Did I miss a question here? No, that's just the other question that was there. Okay. All right, so we have a concert starting now, so we'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.